The first lynching in Oconee County's long and storied history took place on June 29, 1905, and on this date, 9 men were led out behind the Oconee County Jail, tied to fence posts, and summarily shot several times each. Now, one of these men managed to live by playing dead, but the story begins a little bit earlier. Understand that a shopkeep in the town was very well known and liked by everybody in the county, and he and his wife were both brutally murdered by a white killer who was using 3 black men as accomplices. Now, all 4 of these people were very quickly caught and brought to the jail, which had just opened up a few months prior. And newspapers around Georgia praised the restraint of Oconee County citizens because they understood this was an open and shut case, and all 4 men were going to hang regardless of what happened. However, the folks in Monroe County were reading the same newspapers, and they decided to enact a bit of vigilante justice. The fact that 3 black men were present at a murder and they weren't immediately killed without trial just incensed that county. So 75 to 100 armed men rode in front of the jail on their horsebacks and forced the marshal at gunpoint to open all the cells. So 9 people were let out. An additional number of black people were let out simply because they were there for playing cards or throwing dice or standing around and breaking the black laws. So they were all let out and summarily shot behind the jail. And the only man to be given a marker was 20-year-old Sandy Price, whose mother wanted him to have a proper funeral. And on his grave, it simply says, "Our loved one." It's very likely that the other 7 victims of this lynching were buried somewhere else in the black part of this cemetery. Actually, if you look behind, you can see a good deal of these metal markers which say, "Grave owner name is lost." Now, these would have been poor white people, but mostly blacks who were buried here under wooden crosses and quickly forgotten. And anybody who was killed in the local jail, or because it was a sundown town, would have not even been marked at all. And this cemetery continues back into the hills over here. And this was the first lynching to happen in this part of the country, in this county, although a number of years later it would become famous again, or infamous, in 1946 with the Morse Ford lynchings, when 2 black couples and their infant child were killed. And you can see that these burial practices continued up into modern times. Nowadays, they're marked usually by, at least in my encounters, LDS people who believe it's very important to document the resting places of different folks. You can see that in these parts of the cemetery, they didn't even give them proper caskets. You can see the indents in the ground, and these continue pretty far back here. Some of them, like the one over here, actually look like just pits dug in the ground. Very difficult to make out. Cemeteries in the Deep South were often segregated, and in the outskirts of the old Watkinsville City Cemetery, you have the grave of Uncle Hardy. And on this grave, it says that he was a faithful Christian black man, still loyal to his old master and mistress, industrious and capable. He was born in about 1818, and you can see some of the old folksy language here. Chillin, Grandchillin, Marster, and he is buried along with all of these metal markers you can see are very likely slaves or poor black people. And this part of the cemetery continues up to the hills over here. 34 Confederate soldiers are actually buried in the same cemetery in the most well-kept part of it. Behind my car over there is the black part of the cemetery where graves are harder to identify or unmarked.
Southwest on Mount Carmel Church Road toward Mount Enid Church Road.